Hey, I'm Coach Scott, and I'm here to talk to you today about how to pick the right bike for your 5 and 6-year-old child. Okay, hey, good news. At 5 years old, you are about to get into a bike size that very well will last 2 years. It's really the first wheel size that you get 2 years out of. And what wheel size is that? Well, it's the 20-inch wheel. So all the bikes in front of me here have wheels that are 20 inches in diameter. The bad news is the 20-inch wheel category is probably the most confusing category to figure out because there's so many different choices. I'm gonna walk you through all these bikes, and we're gonna talk about some key features and, more importantly, some benefits to your child that you really should be on the lookout for when it comes to buying a 20-inch bike. Okay, let's start down the end here. This bike is something that you might find a lot at one of the big department stores. And it's a pretty cool looking bike. It's got some glitter paint, it's got pegs, that's these things here. It's got handbrakes, it's got some cool styling. But honestly, that's where the cool factor of this bike ends. Unfortunately, bikes like this have some pretty big hurdles to get over for a child. First of all, the geometry is pretty awkward. And what I mean by geometry is how the bike is shaped. So how long it is this way, how tall it is this way, all the different angles that make up the bike. This bike isn't really designed or made for frequent riding or comfortable riding. It's based on a BMX style of bike that's used primarily for tricks and riding maybe in a skate park or on some ramps. If your child's doing that stuff, that's awesome. We love BMX. But if they're not a BMX rider, a BMX bike like this, especially an entry level BMX bike like this, is gonna really hold them back. So first of all, I wanna point out these pegs. These pegs are for usually grinding or, buddy pegs. We like to put our buddy on the back of the bike. But if you're just out there riding, if your child's out there riding, they probably don't have any need for pegs like that. Pegs just add a whole bunch of weight, they get in the way, and they kind of kick you in the shin from time to time. The other thing that you want to be thinking about is brakes. So a bike like this typically has very low quality brakes that very quickly don't actually stop the bike. They're made with really low end parts, and they have a lot of opportunity for dirt and grime to get in the way, to get those cables all gummed up, and then the brakes really don't work very well at all. The next bike I want to talk about is also something that you might find at a department store. Really cool looking bike, lots of styling, and probably would work really well for most kids who are just riding around their street or just in their cul-de-sac. The thing that I want to point out about this bike is the gearing. So although the fit might be okay, it only has one gear. And at the 20-inch wheel size, you have an opportunity to get lots of gears. Why do you want different gears in the back? Well, if a child has multiple speeds on their bike, they can go up hills quicker and easier, and they can also keep up faster on the flats. So gears are great. If you have a bike with just one gear in the back, you also likely will have the pedal brake. So this bike, in order to slow it down and stop it, you have to stand on the pedals and push backwards. That's a really tough concept for kids to figure out. Pedal forward to go forward, oh, stop, it's an emergency situation, I have to reverse my pedaling and go backwards. So there's definitely a safety factor there. But the other thing is, it's really hard to teach kids all the different milestones of progression that come at this age. Most importantly, standing and coasting. So coasting is when you're riding a bike without pedaling. And in order to advance bike skills, especially if you start riding off-road, you have to teach kids how to stand on their pedals with their pedals level to the ground. Unfortunately, with a bike like this, if you stand with your feet level to the ground like this, it most of the time activates the brake by mistake. So when you teach a child how to ride on a bike with a coaster brake, it's really hard to teach them to stand and coast. So they end up standing and coasting with one foot up and one foot down. Not a very safe position if you're trying to actually stay balanced and control your speed and ride safely on any sort of variable terrain. So if you're on rocks and roots and whatnot, it's really unsafe to stand up with 1 foot up and 1 foot down. It's like standing on one leg. So we really, really, really recommend, once you're at the 20-inch level, get a bike with gears. So let's talk about that. This bike has a full set of gears back here. There's 7 speeds that a child can choose from. The bigger the gear, the easier it is to pedal. So now all of a sudden a child has all kinds of opportunity to get up those hills quicker and easier with less effort, AKA more fun, and they can keep up with adult riders going on flat trails or down the street because they're not trying to pedal with one gear that's super hard to pedal or too easy to pedal and they're not going anywhere. What we're also really fond of is hand brakes that actually work. So when you look at a higher quality bike, like a Woom or a Prevelo right here next to me, you're gonna find really light action brakes that actually work and stop a child with hardly any effort up in their fingers. So we don't have to worry about pedaling backwards to stop. We've got really strong, great hand brakes. Oh man, this bike is so light too. Here's another option of a really nice, lightweight 20-inch bike. Full set of gears, pedal backwards, and extremely light. These bikes are easy to pick up, easy to navigate, easy to negotiate, and just a whole lot of fun to ride. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is suspension. So this bike and all the others we just talked about, we call these rigid bikes. There's no suspension here. This is a hard fork. Turn over here to this bike and you'll notice that this fork looks a little different. So this has a suspension fork. When a child hits a bump in the trail, the fork moves up and down. It's an awesome feature. If your budget allows for it, we highly recommend getting into at least a front suspension fork because it creates more control. You know, you're riding down the trail, you hit a bump or a rock or a root, and you maintain your direction. So suspension forks are great, but there's a little bit of an asterisk. Not all suspension forks are adjustable with an air spring. So over here in this chamber, on this side of the fork, I have an air valve. I can adjust the air pressure and we can make it perfect for the rider weight who's on this bike. All right, so front suspension is great. Full suspension is awesome. There are a lot of different 20-inch wheel full suspension bikes out there, but 99.9% of them are really low quality. They're really heavy, they don't really work. The suspension is there for looks alone. It's not actually a functional suspension, but there are some exceptions to that. So we sell both Norco and Spawn full suspension 20-inch bikes that work phenomenally well. The air chamber in these suspension shocks and forks are tuned for kids' weight. So you can set them at really low pressures, so it actually works really well for kids. And I'm not saying every 5 and 6-year-old needs to be on a full suspension bike, but if you have a child who's out there really enjoying mountain biking and really ripping on the trails, a full suspension bike is an awesome way to go because it gives them more control, more safety, more stability, and again, more fun. You'll also notice on this bike that the tires are a little bit wider. That's also something to look for. 20-inch bikes sometimes have really skinny tires, which is fine if you're just riding around the neighborhood or riding only on pavement. But if you're gonna be riding off-road and doing a little bit of mountain biking or a lot of mountain biking, you definitely wanna look for a wide, knobby tire to give the rider control, stability, and grip, and all that also leads to more fun. Okay, so that's sort of the lowdown on 20-inch bikes. What you wanna look for is good quality brakes, lightweight, a full set of gears. Don't get a single speed bike if you can avoid it. And some suspension. You know, if the budget allows, we really recommend suspension. All right, there you have it. That's the lowdown on 20-inch bikes from mild to wild. We'd love to answer more questions. We just touched on a couple of the key points. So if you want to reach out and ask us anything at all about bikes for your 5 and 6-year-old child or any other child for that matter, just hit us up and we'd love to talk to you. In the meantime, keep your thumbs up and the rubber side down.